Now, here we see, Rabotai, that the enemy is much stronger than we could ever prepare for. And in fact, the enemy is sometimes could be in your backyard, could be in your front yard, could be even in your bedroom. And therefore, this instruction set that Rav Elchanan Wasserman is giving us is telling us your only weapon is knowledge of the Torah and the commitment to fight the fight. Now, one of the things that a person needs to know is knowledge of what this is. As he says, there's 5. Which ones are the worst? Which ones are the biggest troublemakers? Says Rav Wasserman, ובעלי מחלוקת הם הגרועים מכולם והם נקראים עמלקים. ואין בית דוד בא עד שימחו מן העולם. Says those that cause the disputes among the Jewish community, where they decide things that are against the Torah. Why? Simply because they want honor, because they want to be the boss, they want to tell people what to do, not because they want to honor the Torah. So they're going to tell you, listen, from now on, long dress is not modest. You have to wear short dress. From now on, wearing a mitpachat like Sarai Imenu is not modest. You have to wear a long wig. Things that are against logic. And then when you bring them, obviously, Chachamim that say the opposite, immediately they attack you. They attack you. These are the people that will reject young kids coming to their yeshiva or their seminary, not because they're not qualified intellectually or even financially, but rather because they simply don't like them because of their background. Doesn't like him because he's Sephardi. He doesn't like him because his mother is Ashkenazi. He doesn't like him because of this. All types of stupid things. Now, there's also those that we deal with behind the scenes that unfortunately cause a lot of terror inside the Jewish communities, usually don't hit the media, but nonetheless cause a lot of damage. That if you don't do what their Rebbe said, either during his life or post-mortem, automatically you become enemy. Right now we have a situation, Talmid Chacham, giant Talmid Chacham, who is very, very devoted to the teachings of Rav Ovadia Yosef, came out with a sefer full of pictures of Rav Ovadia fulfilling all of the halachot of the Torah. Fantastic sefer, beautiful sefer. Sefer that should be in every Jewish bookstore. What happened? A group of Erev Rav decided to put a bad word against him. Why? Because he has some pictures in the book of Rav Ovadia next to some rabbis that they don't like. So since you've included those pictures, that's it. No one's allowed to buy your book. And they're publicizing this and all types of other rumors against them and so on. These are Erev Rav, called Amalek. Now, of course, we have the Amalek outside of the Jewish community that's frum. In government, there's simply no end in sight. People like Avigdor that literally had commercials during the elections a few years ago that replicated the words of the Nazis against the Jews, even though he's technically a Jew living in Israel, in the government of Israel. He had anti-Semitic commercials because of his hatred for the Torah. People that sometimes wear a kippah, but unfortunately fight against the Jewish community in conniving ways. These are all Amalek. And the Chachamim teach us, En ben David ba ad shimchu min haolam. The Mashiach will not come until this type of Amalek is destroyed from the world. And therefore, Rav Elchanan Wasserman continues and he says to us, Amalekim em Rashi Israel bagalut. Amalekim are not going to be just anybody's. Amalekim are going to be the heads of state, the heads of major organizations, the heads of all types of powerful positions in the exile. And on them it's written from the prophet Jeremiah in the book of Echa, Lamentations, chapter 1, verse 15. Our problems, our enemies, our troubles were ahead, meaning the worst ones, the worst enemies, they had the leadership position. וכל עזי פנים ורשעים שבדור הם מגלגול נשמתם של ערב רב ובני קין. And know this, he says, all of those arrogant, wicked people that are in the generation, and he's not just talking about anyone that's arrogant because he's really tall or he's really short or he knows how to throw a ball or he has some money in his pocket. No, we're talking about a certain type of arrogance that is aimed against the Torah, against the Jewish life, against the Jewish people, even if he himself is Jewish. That type of azpanim, that type of rasha, in the generation, he says you should know, they are reincarnation of the Erev Rav that are the descendants of Cain. Now, why do we have to bring up Cain? He hasn't been around for several thousand years. Almost 5,700 years you haven't seen Cain. Why does Cain have to do with all of this? Because the Erev Rav all started with him. You see, Cain brought the klipa, or the tum'ah, the impurity of fighting that leads to death to the world. And when Cain killed his brother Abel, the tum'ah glued itself to him. He brought on himself such a high level of impurity, such a high level of tum'ah, that it empowered the angel of death. As the Gemara says in Masechet Baba Batra, in page 16a, that the Yetzer Hara is also named Satan, and he's also Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. Why do we need to know the different names that the Yetzer Hara has? In a different Gemara it says he has 7 names. Why do we need to know all these names? Because it's not names over here where one is giving him a nickname of Steve and the other one calls him Joe and the other one calls him Honey and the other one calls him Baby. No. Each name is a job. Each name is a role. And the Gemara is telling us in this specific place that this Yetzer Hara, first he entices a person to sin. Then he prosecutes against them as the Satan. After he prosecutes against them, it's not enough. He then wants his neshama. Meaning that the Satan is not happy with just making you sin. It's not enough for him. What he wants is to make you sin, and then sin again, and then sin again, and then sin again until you die. How could that lead to death? Simple. Each and every single time a person makes a sin, they disrespect their parents, they steal money, they hurt people, they mock the Torah, they do all types of heretical things. Each time is a sin. And the Gemara in Masechet Shabbat says a person that expresses their anger will ultimately become an idol worshiper. Why? Because he's already following the Yetzirah on a regular basis. Today he's going to do this, tomorrow he's going to do that. Before you know, he's going to give his neshama to the Satan for idol worship. And therefore the Satan, what he wants is a person to make a sin and another sin. Because each time he makes a sin, he creates a certain level of impurity that now glues onto this person's neshama. Now, of course, the Satan wants the neshama, but he can't just take control of a holy neshama that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave you. That Tzelem Elokim. He can't just take the Tzelem Elokim whenever he feels like it. He has to find a way to trap it. How does he trap it? By your anger, by the stealing, by idolatry, by immorality, by all types of things that are against the Torah. And each and every single time a person makes a sin, he puts more and more tum'ah on that neshama that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him. To the point where there's so much impurity on that neshama that the Satan now has control over it. And thereby gets the permission to take the neshama and fulfill his role of the angel of death. This first started with Cain. When Cain murdered his brother, he didn't just murder him out of nothing. It all started with a fight. It started with jealousy. Cain was jealous of Hevel. That jealousy led to a fight. That fight led to murder. And therefore, the section of the evil that's in the world is called Amalek. Because that Amalek, they're in charge of the fights. They're in charge of the killing. They're in charge of the disputes among brothers. They're the worst type. And Rav Elchanan Wasserman says that those that come from Cain, they're the Amalek. And this is hinted to in the Torah. Meaning this is not just an idea that Rav Elchanan Wasserman is creating out of thin air, or that the Gaon Vilna created out of thin air, chas v'shalom. These are all part of the Torah. How can they see all of what we just said in the Torah? He says, look at the Torah in Sefer Bereshit, Parashat Vayishlach, chapter 33, verse number 2. If a person learns Torah like the Chachamim, like the Jewish sages, they will see an endless supply of secrets. An endless supply of secrets to the point where they're literally going to be able to know what's going to happen tomorrow. But when they learn Torah, like the heretics, idolaters, scorners, and wicked others, then not only are they not going to be able to tell what's going to happen tomorrow, but they didn't even realize what happened yesterday. So Rav Elchanan Wasserman says, inside the Parashat Vayishlach, this is a parasha that is talking about the war of Amalek, because the previous parasha that we had, Parashat Vayetze, is talking about the birth pangs of Mashiach. Vayishlach is already the war, strategy. And he says, you see it, chapter 33, verse number 2. Yaakov is going to meet up with Esav. Now, Esav has come with 400 battalions. Yaakov has sent him gifts. Yaakov has sent him all types of bribes to soften his evil heart. But now, the meeting is taking place. And Yaakov has split his camp into multiple levels. And it says, V'yasem et hashfachot v'et yilden rishona. Yaakov put the handmaids and their children first. It Says Rav Elchanan Wasserman here, Vayasem et hashfachot ve'et yelden rishona ema Erev Rav. This is where we learn the instructions of where to find Erev Rav in the last generation. You will find them ahead. Why? Yaakov put the children of the handmaids, meaning they were the least significant. They weren't the children of Rachel or Leah. They were the maidservants, still the tribes. They still were part of the people, the nation, but they were the least of them. Yaakov put them ahead. He says, why? This is symbolic for the last generation before Mashiach comes. The heads of the Israeli government, of many of these so-called Jewish organizations, communities, and even yeshivot and synagogues, says Rabbi Chaim Volozhin, are going to be comprised many times of Erev Rav, where they are the least qualified, but they were gifted the highest positions, front positions. ואת לאה וילדיה אחרונים. Says, and the verse continues, and Leah and her children next. Who is Leah and her children? Who is that symbolic of? Says, Leah and her children, that is the Amei Haaretz, הטובים שהם, כפופים תחת הערב רב. Leah and her children, they were the simple, Amei Haaretz. They were good people, traditional people, Masorti people, decent people that really don't know much Torah. They keep the basics, they do the best they can, they're doing tshuva, but they're not Talmidei Chachamim. But unfortunately, they are falling for the traps of the Erev Rav. They're under the control of the Erev Rav. They see the Erev Rav making all types of laws against the yeshivot, against the kollel, against the Jewish people that are learning Torah. They want to make us carry guns into a hopeless war. For what? Just so you can get them to stop learning Torah. Even the Amei Haratzot, most of the soldiers, and say, why? Why do you need more? We already have more than enough soldiers. We don't need. In a recent film that we just completed by Rav Ephraim and Bezrat Hashem will be publicized later this week, we get literal statistics about the army showing that over 94% of Jewish people that enter the Israeli army are never actually in battle. Most people think, if somebody goes to the army, their life's at risk. It's not really true. Some of them are doctors, some of them are peeling potatoes, some of them are computers, some of them are technicians. They all have a good use, but they're not all going to battle. And we see right now, as soon as this whole nightmare started on October 7th, they drafted 300,000 people, and then they return a bunch of them but go back home. Why? Can't do anything with them. We don't need that many. We're not fighting China. But here's the problem. The problem is that Amalek doesn't care about what we need to defend ourselves. The Erev Rav's primary goal is to stop the Torah from being learned. Stop the Torah from being learned. And even the simple people, the Amei Haratzot that may not be Torah scholars, they're saying, listen, what do you want from these religious people? Leave them alone. You don't like them. You don't want to be religious. You don't like them learning Torah. Fine. Don't like it. No one's telling you to like or not like, but leave them alone. But unfortunately, some of them can even be influenced. Some of them can be influenced by the Erev Rav. In fact, everyone can be influenced by the Erev Rav. There's no such thing as spending time with the Erev Rav, learning from the Erev Rav and not being influenced by them. This is one of the greatest dangers that most people simply do not realize. In fact, The danger is so extraordinary that this is one of the things that the Chazon Ish says he was more scared of this, more concerned of this, than he was of the Erev Rav itself and their decrees. He was concerned that the way that the Erev Rav makes their poison look and taste sweet is going to entice many religious Jews that are not part of the Erev Rav, but to unfortunately become part of the Erev Rav, to fall for the trap of the Erev Rav. Because they make their potion of heresy look good. And many times this affects both religious and non-religious, but especially those that are unlearned in Torah. Even if they're religious, doesn't necessarily mean that they're learned in Torah. Many times people assume that just because somebody looks religious, they have peyot, they have a hat, they have a beard, that means that they're learned in Torah. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily true. So, Rav Elchanan Wasserman says that from here we learn in Parashat Vayishlach the steps of how the world is going to look like. If you're looking at the heads, don't be surprised if you see the head of the organization, head of the government, or even head of some Jewish organization that supposedly means to do well for the Jewish people. Don't be surprised if they're joining with the enemies. They're joining with idol worshippers. They're joining with Amalek, because they are Amalek themselves. Secondly, if you look at your fellow Jews that are not the Torah scholars, don't be disappointed if some of them follow the Erev Rav. It's not because they are always Erev Rav, but rather because they're surrounded by them. They're surrounded by Erev Rav. And you can't be surrounded by Erev Rav, you can't be surrounded by Amalek without being impacted by them. So that is the second. And what about the third? And the verse continues, says in Rachel and Yosef last. Rachel and Yosef, achronim. Who is Rachel and Yosef symbolic of? Says Rav Elchanan Wasserman. Rachel and Yosef achronim, this is referring to the Talmidei Chachamim, Shem Shvelim Mikol. Rachel and Yosef is referring to the last generation, the generation before Mashiach, is going to have Torah scholars. But unfortunately, these Torah scholars, the real ones, many times are going to be viewed in the worst perspective by the leaders, by the powerful. They're going to be mocked. They're going to be insulted. They're going to be called all types of horrible, horrific names. They're going to be lied about. People are going to say, oh, they're living off of us as if we really are. Oh, they don't contribute anything. Complete nonsense. All of the major non-profit organizations that are Jewish organizations are run by religious people, are run by Talmidei Chachamim. But unfortunately, the Erev Rav is going to make the Talmidei Chachamim, the Torah community, viewed in the worst possible way, and many times hurt them in such horrible ways that many of them are going to suffer financially and otherwise because of the Erev Rav.